Simran, are you ready to? Oh, there you are. You're on screen. Excellent. And as I have mentioned, this is Interfaith San Antonio Alliance Zoom In Thursday. So we never know who's going to be available to join us, but we're so grateful that you are here, all of you. But we are recording because I have had requests from folks who could not join us today, but very much wanted to hear what Simran had to share. So we are recording this session, and we will welcome other folks as they come in and join us as well. And we are absolutely thrilled to have one of San Antonio's own in Dr. Simran Jeet Singh with us today. And we welcome you virtually home. So we know you're in New York City, right?
I am, yeah, based in New York City. I can show you buildings. That's kind of what we have here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can show you trees out my window.
Right, exactly. We don't have those.
Yeah, not so much, not so much. Excellent. Well, we want to talk with you today about a number of things, but in particular, your new book. And the title is Fauja Singh Keeps Going, right? So, yeah, is this your first book?
It's my first children's book, right? And it is. It's been quite a ride. What I didn't realize in writing it was that that children's publishing is the most competitive field within publishing, and so there were many stories that I tried. There were many drafts of this book before it was finally accepted. But very, very happy it ended up at Penguin Random House, which is the world's largest publisher, and that had been the dream. So I'm very, very happy with how it's turned out.
Well, there's no doubt being able to be published, period, but particularly by such an outstanding publishing house is a big deal. But Simran, we know you're a big deal. I'm just saying. And if there's any doubt, I have a whole page of information here that really fills up more than we have time for in this whole hour to talk about your accomplishments. But I do want to let people know that you are a native of San Antonio. You are the second son of Winky and GP Singh, and you're one of 4 very accomplished brothers, but you seem to be the scholar of the family. Seems like you just can't get enough degrees. I noted that not only did you graduate from Trinity University, always good news in the hometown, you also have multiple degrees from Columbia there in New York. I understand you're teaching there currently. You also teach at Union Theological Seminary. And we also have some shared friends, I've learned, from your degree at Harvard Divinity School. So, yeah. Are you never going to graduate from being a student?
Right, exactly. I think I was 35 when I'm 36 now. So I was 33 when I finally finished all my training. But yeah, it was a long haul, but I really enjoyed it. And yeah, saying that I'm the scholar in the family is a nice way of saying I'm the nerd, which is true. But yeah, books have always been near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, nerds make the world go round. What would we do without them? So tell us, if you would, a little bit of the motivation, and let me be specific. Having gone to your website, I know that you are a writer, teacher, scholar, and activist. In addition to being GP and Winky's son, I know you're a husband and a dad of preschoolers. So, you know, you're a real person. You got a lot going on, juggling a lot of roles, no doubt. But how did these roles of writer, teacher, scholar, activist, how did that lead you to write not just a children's book, but this children's book? And if you will, just pick up where you left off a minute ago about you tried lots of ideas and pitched stories, and you found out just how competitive the children's book market is.
Yeah, it's a great starting point as a question, and I think one of the real challenges that I felt in getting this book through was that as I shared my ideas with publishers, the standard response I would get from them is there's no market for books with Sikh characters. No American relates to people with beards and turbans. And that's a story that I've been hearing from childhood, even in San Antonio growing up, that, you know, we had this really lovely community, you know, our neighbors, our classmates, our teammates, like we were all close and friends, and it was very much a normal experience. But when we would try and go out and say, look at our lives and connect with us, people who didn't know us would say, oh no, we don't know you and we're not interested, right? It was a very common experience. And that's essentially what the publishers have been saying to me the last several years. And so to me, the way that I was raised in San Antonio, and the way that I've really come to view the world today, is that people are willing, if you give them the chance. People do want to connect, and they are ultimately, people are ultimately good. And the challenge with racism and marginalization really is that we don't give ourselves a chance to get to know people. And so that was my thesis with the book. I knew that if I could just get somebody to buy into it and to see the value, then we could do something big. And so the challenge then is, how do you get someone to see the value? Well, in a children's book, you just have to tell a beautiful story. And that was the hard thing that I was finding. Like, what is the right story for our times today? What is a story that will connect with kids and connect with parents in a way that sends and shares messages that we want to be instilling in our kids? And so I was struggling. I think the biggest struggle for me was one of being in teacher mode. Like, I would write these stories, but I would always have like the lesson at the front and center, and it was so easy to see. And when you do that, it's just not interesting to a kid, right? Like they don't want to be told what to do. They want to hear stories. Exactly, like all of us. And so it was in a conversation with a friend who asked me one day, as I was struggling through the writing process. She just said, what's something really personal for you? What's really inspired you and changed your life that you enjoy sharing with other people? And that's when I brought up the story of this man who was the first to run a marathon at 100. The day that he crossed the finish line at 100 was the day that I signed up for my first marathon, and it totally changed my life. And so thinking about his story and what he had contributed to me, that helped me think about what I could tell and share with the world.
How interesting. Had you met him at that point?
I had met him twice by that point. I had met him, actually, my parents were with me when he was touring in the States. I think he was 103 when we saw him in Washington, D.C. for the first time. And so I had a nice conversation with him, and really enjoyed being in his presence. And then I met him again. He was on tour in New York City as a celebrity for a race, 2016, April of 2016. So that was the second time we met. And that was the time, so my daughter had just been born. She was born in February of that year. And I went to go meet him, and I took her with me. And he held her in his hands as we talked. And I kept thinking, like, how beautiful it would be if she could just absorb everything he was saying. And as I was thinking that, like, that's when the idea really came of, you know, we could tell his story and she could get all this wisdom from him in a different form.
That moment of inspiration. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, putting those pieces together, please share the story, because I've had the privilege of reading the book, but I would imagine most of the people listening have not read it. What is the story of Fauja Singh?
Well, Fauja Singh, I mean, it's a story of a young boy who was born in 1911. That's his birth year, so a long time ago. And he's born in a village in India, in Punjab, which is my parents' homeland. And he, as a young boy, is unable to walk. And because he's unable to walk, he's unable to go to school. And he gets teased by his friends for his disabilities. And it's a story really of perseverance, how he is able to continue pushing his own limits and overcoming some of the challenges in his life, whether that's, you know, the inability to walk from a young age, the depression that sets in when he gets older and his family starts to die, and he loses his loved ones. Like, that's a really tough moment in his life. He immigrates to a new country. He moves to England. and he has no friends, and he doesn't speak the language, and he doesn't read or write. And so there are all sorts of challenges that he encounters in his life that I think really help us connect with him on a human level, but also the inspiration we get from someone who encounters these challenges and continues to persevere. Like I find that to be so inspiring within my own life, especially as we're looking around the world right now and seeing all sorts of challenges. And it's so easy to feel like we need to give up, right? There's no hope. But one of the things we learned from his story is that we don't have to give up, and there's real beauty in perseverance.
Do you have a way to show us anything from the book, or should I do it? You mentioned sharing screen, and I got to tell you, I'm not quite sure how to do that. I pressed on the button.
Let me see if I'm able to do that. I have it pulled up on my computer.
Yeah, I've got one participant can share at a time, so I think that means you can.
Yeah, here we go. Let me know if this is working. Are you able to see
Yeah,
it?
yeah, great. We have some lovely mango wallpaper.
Right, yeah, that's the opening. And if you know anybody from India or South Asia, that's the most popular fruit there. So here are some images. The illustrator is also a Punjabi Sikh woman who's based in the UK. She's based in a town called Wolverhampton. And she did an amazing job in putting together the illustrations for the book. And then we have a nice foreword from Fauja Singh at the beginning of the book, which we can come back to later. But I'll read a few pages from the beginning of the book here.
Oh, please do. That'd be lovely.
It was a sweltering summer. Little Fauja Singh sat under the shade of a banyan tree in his village in Punjab, eating mangoes and watching the other children play. Fauja was smart and funny. He and his friends liked to play cards and marbles while sitting in a circle and telling jokes. But Fauja longed to join them when they ran and jumped. He longed to play hopscotch, to rescue a runaway cricket ball, or to run with a kite flying high across the sky. He wished he felt as strong as his name, which meant warrior lion. When he was very little, his parents worried that he might never walk. Month after month and year after year went by, but Fauja did not take a single step. Aunts and uncles, grandmas and grandpas shook their heads gravely and said, "It's too hard, he's too weak." But Fauja did not listen, and Fauja did not stop. Instead, every morning he would listen to his mother, who said, "You know yourself, Fauja, and you know what you're capable of. Today is a chance to do your best."
Writing on a page for Julia's book. I'm writing on a page for Julia's book. Yes.
Fauja practiced walking outside his family's hut each day, staying in the mud to soften every fall. He practiced and prayed for months. He could feel himself getting stronger, inside and out. Then, a few days after Fauja's 5th birthday, a wonderful thing happened. He took one step and another, then another and another and another. Fauja Singh was finally walking. Fauja's parents were proud that their son understood what he was capable of and that he worked hard to achieve his goals. They were thrilled Fauja could walk because they knew it would make his life easier. His parents were so happy, they shared prayers of thanks and distributed prasad to the entire village. I'm happy to pause there. Wendy, if you want me to keep going, I can.
Well, I think I'm mesmerized, but be that as it may, I do have some questions to ask, even from the section that you've read, and then we'll open it up because I don't want to leave out the rest of the folks on the call to be a part of the conversation. But one of the things that I appreciated, and others I've shared the book with, we really appreciate the fact that you use some very key repetitive phrases. The blessing is what I would call it, that his mother gives him. You know, this message shows up over and over in the book, as well as the message of perseverance. And then there are also images that are repeated. You know, Fauja as a little boy, and he's getting his very long hair combed out by his mother. And then later there's the image of him as an old man and working with his hair. So can you tell us about those choices, about choosing to use those points of repetition in the book? Because I'm thinking this is where the teacher part comes out.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll pull up the specific line that his mother gives him while she's combing his hair. She says, so one of the points of repetition is but Fauja did not listen and Fauja did not stop. And you can hear very clearly this comes up probably 7 or 8 times in the book. And one of the things I really try and instill in our kids, whether it's in the classroom or in our own home, is this idea that no one can tell you what you're capable of. And you don't need to set limits on yourself based on other people's perceptions. I think that's something that I learned as a child, especially in dealing with the racism that came my way and the assumptions that people had. And what we learned from our parents was you can't control how people treat you, but you can control how you respond. And so that's kind of the spirit of what I'm trying to get at when I say Fauja did not listen and Fauja did not stop. His mother's phrase, this is one we worked on quite a bit. What we really were being cognizant of was that the challenges that Fauja Singh faced in his life were very particular to his experience, but at the same time, these are challenges that so many people share. And so we wanted to say it in a way where it felt like he was being given wisdom for his own life experience, but something that we could all take for our lives too, whether as children or as adults. So you know yourself, Fauja, and you know what you're capable of. Today is a chance to do your best. I mean, the beautiful thing out of this is this being the first week of school for a lot of people, I've received so many messages from parents saying that this phrase is what they've been telling their kids before they go to school every day. You know yourself, you know what you're capable of. Today is a chance to do your best. So that's been really touching to me, because I think, especially in situations of disability, it's easy for us to fall into this idea. And we talk about this a lot in running as well. No one knows what you're capable of more than yourself. And you have to learn to listen to your body. You have to learn to listen to your spirit. And that's something that I try and teach my kids as well. Like, what does your body tell you? What does your heart tell you? That's the way we talk to our 4-year-old. And so to see it sort of play out throughout his life as a mantra, as something that he can go back to for constant wisdom, I think that's how these things work for us. That's like a compass in tough moments. The last thing I'll say is about your observation about the illustrations. So I didn't know this. The illustrator did this herself, and I heard her talking about it recently at an event that we did. But she told me that in real moments of strife in Fauja Singh's life, she depicted something around hair, which in our tradition is seen as a source of strength and power. And so anytime that Fauja Singh needed to tap into his reserve of strength, there would be some reference to hair. So I'll give you an example here, where his grandmother is combing his hair. There's another moment here, later in his life, where he, after 9/11, decided to run the New York City Marathon as a way to help Sikhs fight the racism they were dealing with here in the States. He was 93 years old at the time, and there was a lot of doubt as to whether he'd be able to do it. And so this is another moment in the book where the illustrator decided to bring in the hair and the turban as a symbol of strength here. I think there's one more, if I'm remembering correctly. I might be missing it. I'll go back and look for it. But yeah, your observation is right on point, that hair is a real symbol of strength for him.
Mm-hmm. And this is part of what I think, back to what we were saying about the subtlety, instead of saying, here's what you need to learn from this book. This beautiful weaving of image and information, and yet it leaves us questioning, oh, well, why is that? And invites the reader, the teacher, whomever, to investigate more and learn more. I shared this book with my son, who's much closer to your age than your children's age. And interestingly enough, this was the very thing he picked up on was, oh, look how there's the repetition of paying attention to his hair. And so I asked that in particular because he said, find out about that. When you talk to him, find out about that. So I appreciate that. And I have more input from another friend whom I shared this with, who's a children's spiritual development specialist. But before we move to that, let me open the conversation to those of you who are with us on this call at this point to ask if you have questions, so that I don't just dominate when you may have things you want to know as well. Judy Lackritz, what would you like to tell us?
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. I've already gotten 2 copies of the book. And one I gave to my sister to read to her grandchildren in Quito, Ecuador. And the other one is mine. And I read that to my 4-year-old granddaughter and her mother in California. And what I found is I think this appeals to all ages. I think it's really inspiring. Mm-hmm. What I did find with my granddaughter, since I was having to hold the book up, that I simplified some of it, which I felt that she could understand better. But I think it's a wonderful book. And I'm wondering how you have a 4-year-old, how did they respond to it, him or her?
Thank you. It's a great question, and thank you for your support. I think you're right. So the age range for the book is 4 to 8, and so my daughter's on the early end of that range. And so what it means is she doesn't pick up on all the subtleties and even all the vocabulary. For me, what I tried to do in the book, and I think Wendy was just alluding to this, was that instead of preaching to our kids, and instead of hammering them over the heads with lessons, what I've learned in the classroom that tends to be much more effective is to invite conversations. And so to mention and refer to situations and let the kids themselves determine the direction of the conversation. And every time a kid hears the book, my daughter's heard it way too many times at this point. And every time she hears it, she picks up on something different. And sometimes it's a new concept that we haven't explored before. You know, there's in that 9/11 scene or post 9/11 scene that I was just sharing, there are references to racism when people are yelling racial slurs at Fauja Singh. And so she for more than a year now, she just sort of glossed over that moment. And it's just been in the last few weeks where she's asked, why are they saying these things to him? And that's created a real opportunity for me to talk to her about racism, and she's ready for it at this point. And, you know, I'm careful about how I do it and make sure it's age appropriate. But I think one of the real values then becomes these types of issues that we don't talk to our kids about, that we really should be. Right. And that's around, you know, why was he not able to walk? Why weren't his legs strong enough? Like, that's not a conversation that I would have been able to have with my kids in any other context, right? We don't as a society lift up these issues. But yeah, I'm hoping that as she moves from 4 and older towards 8, I think she'll be able to delve deeper into some of these issues. Thank you, Judy.
Thanks, Judy. Other insights or questions from the group? Trust me, I got lots of questions.
I just want to know how I can get a signed copy. How do I go about that? I know how to get a copy. How do I get a signed copy?
Yeah, thank you. So it's become a challenge in the COVID moment, but New York is starting to settle down again. And so I'm supposed to go in this weekend to a bookstore here that will, and go sign copies, and it'll be available that way. So hopefully, if that works out this weekend, then I'll send a link to where those are available.
Great.
Thank you, Anne.
Good question. Good question. Well, I shared the book with, as I mentioned, my friend who is Dr. Tanya Campen. And Tanya did her PhD work very much on intergenerational, but focusing on children's spiritual development. And she's really in love with your book and highly, highly recommends it, and is going to be helping us get the word out about it. Not just what a lovely book it is, which it is, but what a great way to teach and to share and to open things up. So I want to share some, because she couldn't be with us today. She's one of the people that I'm recording this for. And she serves with the Texas Rio Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, which is based here in San Antonio. And she was equally impressed with your deftness as a writer as well as the illustrator. She just said, I just can't get enough. I just keep looking further and further into the images for all the details. But she would want to encourage those, and get this, looking for a book that invites exploration about faith as a daily practice, ability/disability, perseverance, diversity, prayer, encouragement, and goal setting. She says, you know, if any of those things apply or are of interest, this is the book. So you have covered a lot of ground here, a lot of ground. And one of the things that I thought was quite lovely is how she said, if she were using it in a congregational setting, you know, she has a little boy who's not yet 2. So she says, yep, definitely going to be reading it to Luke. But she said, if I were sitting in front of a group of children in, you know, a teaching setting, she said, what her general approach is, and she sees it very well working with this book, is to ask a series of I wonder questions. You know, I wonder what you can learn from Fauja Singh. I wonder what the story tells you about God. I wonder what you can learn about yourself from this story. And then she said she always asks the question, I wonder what God is calling you to do next after hearing this story. How do you respond to that series of I wonder questions from my friend whose work is very focused on children's faith development?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. And I think, you know, one of my, so I've been working in civil rights and social justice for the past decade or so, since being in New York City. And one of my observations has been that while there is a lot of attention to certain aspects of identity, like race and ability and gender, that religion tends to be cast aside in so many of these conversations. And that's so painful to someone and difficult for someone like me who faith is an important part of who I am. And it's a really important part of so many people's stories. And I imagine that's true for a lot of us on this call, and we see that happening and we don't know what to do about it. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to bring authentically, right, for Fauja Singh, to bring faith into the story in a way that it's beautiful and inspiring, and something that can demonstrate and illustrate for people what it can do in our lives, as opposed to something that is damaging or divisive in the way that so many people see it. And so those I wonder questions, I mean, that's exactly what I'm hoping to push here. I mean, again, like you're saying, there are a lot of different elements to the story, and so much I hope people can take away. But one of those around the I wonder questions is this question of, what does it look like for us to see the humanity in people who are different from us? What does it take for us to teach that to our children, to find a true sense of pluralism, a real respect for people of other faiths, and also to recognize what's shared in those traditions, right? So like, it was important to me that we depict really particular aspects of his Sikh practice, like tying his turban, or sitting in front of the scripture, as you saw in that illustration. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing about those that I don't think it comes off in a way, and it doesn't feel to me in a way that's entirely foreign, or something that would disrupt our sense of shared coherence. And I think that's a real gift that a lot of us in the interfaith world try and do, like help people make these connections. And that's a connection that I really would love to see happen.
Well, it is an absolutely beautiful story, but we've only introduced the story. So tell us, in summary, what's the rest of his story? He can't walk as a little boy, and by age 5, he starts to walk, and then what happens?
Well, I can give you a little bit more of the of the insight than I do in the book itself, but it's a remarkable story. So he ends up getting his own farm. He learns to farm from his father because he's unable to go to school. The way that I presented in the story is that he gets his education on the farm, and he eventually starts his own family, and gets his own farm and teaches his own kids to farm. So it's a story about sort of generational development in family. And then when his wife dies and his son dies in a tragic accident on the farm, actually, Fauja Singh, and we don't talk about this in the same way in the book, but he goes into an incredibly deep depression. Basically the people he loved most dearly and who lived with him were now gone. And he didn't have home in the same way that he always had. And at that time, he was in his 80s. So he felt like it was too late to start over. And so he moves to England with his two other children who are living in London. Again, he's 81. He doesn't speak the language. He doesn't read or write. He doesn't have any friends there, and his depression gets worse. And the way he comes out of it is through running. He sees the London Marathon on TV, and he sees people smiling, and he decides he wants to try it. And so he just goes out. He puts his running shoes on, and he gets going, and he builds up over time, and into his 90s. He becomes, at 89, he runs his first marathon in London. In his 90s, he gets stronger and faster and sets world records for that age group. And then he crosses the finish line at 100, and that's where his fame really peaks. So there are ups and downs. There are moments in and we present these in the book, and I think that's really important for our kids. I didn't want to give this sort of arc of a story where everything in life is perfect and there are no challenges. He has moments where he has real deep despair and he almost gives up, and he doesn't. And I think that's part of the lesson for our children. But yeah, it's a beautiful story in real life as much as it is in the book itself.
Yeah. I mean, I read the book and was like, man, I'm such a slacker. Fauja gets stronger in his 90s, so I have something to look forward to. Okay, yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
So do they know why he couldn't walk until he was 5?
They don't. We have learned in talking to him since that it's other members of his family had similar situations, really thin legs that seem to be too weak to be able to walk. So it seems like it must be something genetic. But again, this was in the village in the early 1900s in India, so medicine was not available then. Not just in the way that it is now, but just generally it wasn't available then. So he's never been diagnosed, and he doesn't know what it was that caused that.
Yeah. And just thinking about how different culture, etc., I appreciate your note at the end of the book that the Guinness Book of World Records does not recognize his accomplishment as the oldest person to finish a marathon because he doesn't have a birth certificate. And so there's just that bias of, oh, okay, you don't fit our boxes, so we're not going to accept you. And
yeah, exactly. No, I appreciate you bringing that up. So when I'm thinking about this book and this story, I teach a lot. I teach primarily, right now I'm teaching Buddhist history. And I teach a lot about colonialism and Orientalism. And so I haven't, but I could very well use this as an example. I could bring this book into my class to talk about the ways in which colonial Western standards are then imposed on everyone else who are expected to follow all those rules, right? And so in this case, here's a man who very clearly is 100 years old. There are all sorts of accounts and recognitions of his age, but because of that one document that someone has decided has to be there, right? He doesn't get to enjoy this is something that really he feels pain about. It was something that mattered a lot to him. So I'm thinking of organizing a sort of petition to the Guinness Book of World Records to recognize, he has a British passport that recognizes his birth. He has he's been knighted by the Queen, and on his 100th birthday, right? So like these sorts of things should give us enough documentation of his age, and so maybe they'll be willing to see things a little differently.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's really, if you will, the point of your book. Be willing to see things a little differently.
Yeah. Following up on that remark, Simran, I can see where your book would be of value to individuals who are engaged in doing organizational development or organizational behavior work. Has your publisher talked to you about getting into that market? And second question would be, have you thought about putting this into like a TED Talk?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. We haven't talked specifically around organizational behavior. Where we've really been positioning the book has been around diversity and inclusion, which of course is something that organizations everywhere are thinking about. But I appreciate that point, and I'd love to learn more about what that might look like. The TED Talk idea, I think, is a really good one. It's one that I've been exploring. Let me say it this way: the TED Talk format is not the only
Right.
it's not the only particular platform, but there are a lot of that medium is really popular now, and there seems to be an appetite for it. So that I've really been. I mean, I think part of it is a lot of times in life you don't know what's interesting to people until they tell you you share it and they say, oh, that's interesting. So I've been learning over the last few weeks since the book has come out that there really is interest in some of these topics that I wasn't sure would resonate with people.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, good.
And Simran, I know from reading your bio online and from your website that empathy building is a particular focus of your work and of your life. Just kind of segueing, because I think the book certainly is very much speaking to the importance of empathy building, but how does that play out in real life, the empathy building? How do you teach that?
Teaching it is hard. Modeling it is maybe the best way of teaching it, I think. But I think so. I'll say a few things. I think one of the real challenges with building empathy among people is learning the art of breaking down boundaries. And so, if I was to walk into a conversation of people I didn't know, and all of a sudden started saying certain words that were politicized, right? If I was to walk in and say Black Lives Matter, half the room would shut down because the way in which that specific phrase has been politicized. But if I was instead able to open up a conversation with people that helped them recognize that bias, anti-Black racist biases that we all have, and then move into a conversation around what that looks like, maybe based on storytelling or maybe based on shared values, then we can actually end up in a place where we're seeing the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, as something that's heinous, right? And so it requires a different tact, a tact that I think is a little bit more humble, maybe is the right word, where you don't make it about your own, like trying to convince everyone to see the world your way, but instead trying to meet people where they are and then guiding them along. I think that's education work. That's how the best teachers do it in their classrooms. But I think that's a method that's proven really well for me. I think the other thing that's really helpful is for me to be able to speak from personal experience, and that's something I've become more comfortable with over the last few years. I think growing up, especially, I felt really uncomfortable sharing my stories. In part because they seemed, I didn't want to burden other people with my stories and my experiences. I didn't want to bring too much attention to myself. I felt like I might be taking away from people who had it worse than me. And so all of those things kept me from being willing to share. And what I've learned about vulnerability over time is that when you open yourself up, that helps other people open themselves up. And that's where you can really make those connections. There's this James Baldwin quote that really changed my life with regard to this in particular. He says, "If I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things you don't see." And it was when I came across that quote that I really started to think about sharing my story as an act of service, as an act of love. And that's kind of become my North Star when it comes to empathy building work.
Yeah. And you make an excellent point, because it's very easy for any of us to stay comfortable with who we perceive you to be, what we perceive as your story, as opposed to the fullness and the reality that we all have more to us than just one dimension. And so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
And again, open it up. Anyone else with a comment or question? Let's see, you're going to have to unmute yourself, Omer.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. How did you relate with the illustrator in developing the book?
Oh, that's a great question. So I didn't know much about the process when I started. I didn't know then that the author gets very little say in the illustrations, unless they have the skills to do it themselves, and I certainly don't. And so I was fortunate in that my editor actually invited me to suggest a few names of people whose work I liked, if I had any. And there was this one woman, Baljinder Kaur, who ended up illustrating the book, whose work I had been following for years. And she had demonstrated over the years a keen interest in depicting the elderly. And that was really important to me in terms of capturing the spirit of Fauja Singh, right? Like, especially, so in our culture, in South Asian culture, we are taught to really respect our elders. We call them buzurg, which derives from Persian, which means the great ones, the great people. And so it's just part of how I was raised. And I know that was something important to Baljinder, and especially in a context where, the pandemic is going around the country and people are saying things like our elderly are disposable, right? Like they let them die off like that. It just didn't make any sense to me. So as we were going through this, like I felt more and more urgency around working with an illustrator who could do this in a way that was both culturally relevant, right? She knew the Punjabi and the Sikh histories and cultures, but she also had this real knack for depicting people who look like Fauja Singh. And she lives in the UK. She went to London to go spend time with him and see how he walks and moves and his facial expressions. And she did an amazing job of capturing that. I can show you this image of him, or this picture of him that appears in the back of the book. It looks so much like her illustrations. I think she just did a fantastic job of capturing his spirit.
Very good.
Most extraordinary. Well, friends, we have done the drawing. My very capable assistant, Mitch, you'll see in the chat that we have 6 names that were drawn, because that's what we promised, because GP handed me a nice little stack of books the other day, and I've been able to share some in some key spots, but I have 6 to share with you today. And our winners are Judy Lackritz, Ann Helmke, Ann Fraser, Jenny, Paul Zeese, and Joe Brake. And so I have given you my email address in the chat box, so you can reach out to me and we can make arrangements to connect and get you your book. But what I would challenge you is how you'll use the book. That it won't just be, oh, I have this beautiful book and I'll put it on my shelf, and just in case a child happens into my life, I will share it. No. You are being privileged as a recipient of this book to share it far and wide, to read it for yourself and to soak it in and share the story and the truths in this. In addition to that, to perhaps share it with your congregation, whatever body you're a part of. I think it would be a very valuable book. And Dr. Campen, whom I mentioned earlier, she said she would certainly recommend congregations to include this book in their children's ministry library. So I would encourage you to do that. Read the book, share the book, and then gift it to the congregational library to expand this sense of wonder. And maybe that's what God is calling you to do next from reading the book, is to share the book.
Simran, have you done video book read of it?
I've done events for different, well, yes, Zoom calls over the summer doing.
There are video book reads, especially of children's books, that you can go online and actually hear the author with the images and reading the book.
Oh, I see. No, I haven't.
Of course, that's kind of like giving it away, but there's also something quite beautiful, and it probably would also increase sales. Not that, but people then would want the book. But I would love that, and to be able to even send that out to the networks that I have. And
yeah, that's a great idea. You're right. I've done, like on YouTube, with my kids, we occasionally will just find a book they love and watch a video of somebody reading it. So I see what you're saying. No, I haven't done that. That's a great idea. I will work on that. Thank you.
Cool. Let me know, because I'll use it.
Yeah. And that was another thought along the way is, and this could be for sale, but selling the screen version, if that makes sense, because I'm just thinking so many congregations are meeting online. And to be able to share the book with kids that they can see the images. And, I think that's a fair thing if you were able to produce that kind of thing, to make that available for sale.
Right, exactly. No, that's a great idea. Thank you both. I appreciate that.
All right, so friends, it has been a delightful time together. Is there anyone else that wants to bring up or offer a word before we close?
Wendy, when and how will the recording be available?
I haven't done this before, Joe, so I'm going to figure it out. But what I think I can do, what I feel confident I can do, is by this afternoon, I can have it turned around and I can upload it onto my personal YouTube channel, I think is what it's called. And then I can send that out in the same fashion that I sent out the invitations, and just say, hey, everybody, here's a great chance to hear what you missed. So will that work for you? Okay. All right.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said in the chat, use my email address to contact me so I can connect with you and we can get this wonderful book in your hands to be shared with many other hands. It's a ripple effect. Well, with great appreciation to Simran, Dr. Simran Jeet Singh, for joining us from high above the concrete jungle of New York City, and for sharing this time with us. It is just absolutely precious, and we promise to be good stewards of what you've shared and getting the word out that this isn't just another story, but it's a way to build empathy and a way to change the world. So thank you. Thank you so much, Simran, for sharing your time.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. Simon, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you send your email address?
Sure. Maybe Wendy, feel free to share my email address if you'd like.
Oh,
And also Wendy's email address.
oh my email address is in the chat box, Homer.
Okay.
See, it's from, says from me to everyone. Book winners, contact me at Wendy, WYNDEE, at interfaithsaa.org.
Somewhere. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you one and all,
Really good.
and we'll see you next time.